For 25 years, the Southwest has not agreed on much. They argue about Tinubu, they split over Obasanjo, they divide on restructuring, they fight over who speaks for the Yoruba. The self-determination groups don't agree with the governors don't agree with Afenifere, the OPC doesn't agree with anyone. Even their traditional rulers are divided on almost everything. But in January and February 2025, something happened that had not happened in a generation. The Southwest spoke with one voice, and the person they were speaking to was the Sultan of Sokoto, the most powerful traditional ruler in Nigeria, the spiritual head of Nigerian Muslims, and the President General of the Supreme Council for Islamic Affairs. The Sultan backed the establishment of Sharia arbitration panels in Oyo and Ekiti states. He framed it as a constitutional right. He described the Southwest's resistance as a denial of Muslim rights. And every single major force in Yorubaland, governments, traditional rulers, nationalists, youth groups, secessionists, and civil society said the same thing back to him: no. Now here is the question this channel will answer. Why did it take the Sultan of Sokoto, a man from Sokoto State, a state that borders Niger, to do the one thing that Nigerian politics has failed to do in 25 years? Unite the Southwest. And what does that unity tell us about where Nigeria is actually heading before 2027? Most channels will give you the headline. We give you the architecture behind it. If you have never been here before, you just found Nigeria's most analytical political channel. Subscribe, because what comes next is the part they hope you never piece together. How it started. A flyer in Oyo State. It began quietly in December 2024 with a single digital flyer. The Oyo State chapter of the Supreme Council for Sharia in Nigeria announced that a Sharia court would be inaugurated on January 11, 2025 at the Muslim Community Islamic Center in Mobolaye area, Oyo town. The flyer listed prominent Yoruba Muslim leaders as guests of honor. It went viral almost immediately. Within days, the backlash was overwhelming. Yoruba groups, Christian associations, traditional rulers, and social media collectively rejected the idea. The Supreme Council for Sharia suspended the inauguration indefinitely on January 10, 2025, one day before the scheduled event. The council clarified that what they intended was not a Sharia court, but an arbitration panel for resolving civil and family disputes among consenting Muslims. That clarification did not settle the debate, it escalated it, because then the Sultan of Sokoto stepped in. The Sultan's statement, January 29, 2025. Through his spokesperson, the NSCIA's Deputy National Legal Advisor, Imam Harun Mohammed Eze, the Sultan issued a public statement. He argued that Sharia arbitration panels are constitutionally backed under Section 275 of the 1999 Constitution. He said that the Southwest's resistance to Sharia panels represented the denial of Muslims' constitutional rights. He pointed to the failure of Southwest governors to establish Sharia courts of appeal, which he described as an inexplicable vacuum. The Sultan went further. He cited the hijab controversy in Yoruba schools as additional evidence of systematic religious discrimination against Muslims in the Southwest, pointing specifically to a Supreme Court judgment he said had been defied. That statement transformed a local governance controversy in Oyo State into a national confrontation between the most powerful traditional institution of the Muslim North and the collective identity of Yorubaland. The Sultan framed his position as a defense of constitutional rights, but here is the question almost nobody asked. If Sharia panels already exist in Lagos, Ogun, Oyo, and Osun,
operating quietly and voluntarily in mosques since 2002 in some cases, why did the Oyo announcement trigger a national crisis? We will return to this. The Sultan is the Sultan of Sokoto, not the Sultan of Yorubaland, but he claims authority as the head of all Nigerian Muslims, including Yoruba Muslims. The Southwest's response to this claim is the most analytically significant thing that happened in this entire episode. We will return to exactly what they said and why it matters.
What the Constitution actually says. Section 275 of the 1999 Constitution, which the Sultan cited, provides that any state may establish a Sharia court of appeal for the purpose of exercising appellate jurisdiction over civil proceedings involving questions of Islamic personal law. The critical word in that provision is may. It is permissive, not mandatory, and it applies to civil matters, marriage, divorce, inheritance, not to criminal Sharia law. The 12 northern states that adopted criminal Sharia between 1999 and 2001 did so under a different and more contested constitutional interpretation, one that multiple legal scholars have argued exceeds what the Constitution permits. That debate remains unresolved in Nigerian courts, but it is separate from the question of civil Sharia panels, which the Constitution does appear to permit in states that choose to establish them. Here is the critical institutional detail that reframes the entire debate. Sharia arbitration panels have been sitting in Lagos, Ogun, Oyo, and Osun since 2002, 2003, 2005, and 2018 respectively, long before the January 2025 controversy. They operate inside mosque premises, handle only voluntary civil and family disputes between consenting Muslims, and have done so quietly and without public objection for years. What triggered the January 2025 crisis was not a new Sharia institution, it was the public announcement of one in a style that looked like the formal inauguration of a parallel judicial system, complete with dignitaries, a formal ceremony, and a flyer that circulated across social media. The Southwest was not reacting to Sharia arbitration, it was reacting to what the public announcement suggested, that a formal, publicly recognized Sharia institution was being established with or without the consent of the state government and the traditional institutions of the community. The coalition that has never existed before. To understand why this moment is historically significant, you need to understand who was in the coalition that responded to the Sultan. This was not just Christians versus Muslims. This was not just traditionalists versus modernists. This was every major institutional and political voice in Yorubaland, speaking from entirely different positions, arriving at the same conclusion. Seyi Makinde, the Oyo State Governor and PDP member, said, "People may try, but I swore to uphold our laws and the Constitution of Nigeria. If their actions are within the law, fine. If not, they should expect that I will insist the law must be followed." Dapo Abiodun, the Ogun State Governor and APC member, issued a formal government statement declaring that no Sharia court is authorized to operate within Ogun State and that those behind the notice have no legal backing. Two governors from rival political parties, same message. Gani Adams, the Ari Onakakankfo of Yorubaland and head of the Odua People's Congress, speaking at the 2025 Odua Festival in Ile-Ife, said that Sharia law is alien to Yoruba culture and beliefs and warned that religious fanatics masquerading as Muslims should stay away from acts that could set Yorubaland on fire. The OPC, a group that has fought with governors, traditionalists, and the federal government over the past 25 years, aligned completely with the state governments. Professor Banji Akintoye, the leader of the Oduduwa Nation self-determination movement, addressed the Sultan directly in a 6-page open letter, stating, "The Sultan is not the leader or father of Yoruba Muslims." He cited the fact that the Sultan had never publicly condemned the killing of Yoruba Muslims by Fulani herdsmen over the past decade as evidence that his claim to spiritual authority over Yoruba Muslims was not credible. pan-Yoruba groups representing civil society organizations from Lagos, Ogun, Oyo, Osun, Ekiti, Delta, Kogi, Edo, and Kwara states issued a joint statement saying, "We, the true representatives of Yoruba people, hereby strongly oppose the introduction of Sharia in any part of Oduduwa land." Yoruba youth groups, separatists, traditional rulers including multiple Obas, the Society for Yoruba Culture Renaissance, and the Yoruba World Congress all issued statements in the same direction. Some of these groups have not agreed on anything for 20 years. Here is the reframe. The Sultan's statement was intended to assert that the Muslim community in the Southwest deserves the same institutional recognition as Muslims in the North. That is a legitimate argument. What the Sultan did not anticipate was that his intervention would provide the one issue capable of healing the fractures in Yoruba political society that have accumulated since 1999. The Yoruba response to the Sultan was not primarily about Sharia at all. It was about the question that has haunted the Southwest since the annulment of June 12, 1993. Who speaks for us, and who has the right to make demands of us from outside? The Sultan, by intervening in the internal governance of Southwest states, gave every faction in Yoruba political society an external adversary to unite against. That unification is the most analytically significant political event in the Southwest in years. Now, if what I just told you surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know what you think before we get to the part that changes everything. What this tells us about Nigeria's federal architecture in 2025. The Sharia controversy in the Southwest is a story about federalism as much as it is about religion. The central question it raises is this: does the authority of a national religious institution, the NSCIA, led by the Sultan, extend to states where that institution does not command majority allegiance? The Southwest's answer was no, and the method by which that answer was delivered, through governors, traditional rulers, and civil society simultaneously, represents a multi-layered assertion of state sovereignty and cultural self-determination that is consistent with the restructuring arguments the Southwest has been making for decades. When the Iwi of Ado-Ekiti ordered the dissolution of the Sharia panel, he was doing exactly what the proponents of true federalism have always argued that state and community institutions should be able to do: govern their own affairs without waiting for a national instruction. The 2027 dimension of this episode is also significant. It demonstrated that the Southwest, despite the political fractures over Tinubu, over zoning, over APC internal matters, retains a coherent collective identity that can mobilize rapidly when a perceived external imposition is identified. Any political calculation about the Southwest ahead of 2027 that assumes it is permanently fragmented should be revised in light of this episode. A Southwest that unifies around identity threats is a Southwest that can produce electoral surprises. That lesson should not be lost on any actor planning the 2027 political season. The strongest case for the Sultan's position. Let this channel be precise. The Sultan's position is not without merit and should not be dismissed as an attempted imposition. Sharia arbitration panels have operated in Southwest states for over 2 decades. The one in Lagos has been sitting since 2003, the one in Ogun since 2018, the one in Osun since 2005. These panels were not controversial because they operated privately within mosque premises, handled only voluntary civil matters, and never claimed state judicial authority. The January 2025 controversy was triggered by a flyer that made a private arbitration arrangement look like a formal public institution. That framing problem was the responsibility of those who wrote the flyer, not the Sultan. The Sultan is also correct that Nigerian Muslims in the Southwest have faced documented institutional challenges. The hijab controversy in Yoruba schools, including the defiance of Supreme Court orders by some state governments,
is a real and documented injustice that deserves redress. His frustration with the political elite's failure to address Muslim rights in the region has a legitimate evidentiary basis. 1. The Sultan was trying to impose criminal Sharia law on the southwest. This is factually inaccurate. The NSCIA's stated position was specifically about civil arbitration panels for voluntary Muslim family dispute resolution. Criminal Sharia law, with its provisions for hudud punishments, was never part of what was proposed. The framing of the debate as criminal Sharia imposition misrepresented the actual content of the Sultan's statement. 2. The Southwest was unanimously opposing Islam. The Southwest's resistance was explicitly framed as a defense of multi-religious coexistence, not a rejection of Islam. Pan-Yoruba groups specifically stated that Islam has existed in Yorubaland for centuries and that Yoruba Muslims are integral members of the community. The objection was to external institutional authority, not to Islamic practice. Here is the counterintuitive detail that should give every analyst a pause. The Sultan's intervention backfired so completely that it actually strengthened the hand of those in the southwest who argue for more autonomy from Abuja. By demonstrating that national religious institutions can attempt to intervene in southwest state governance without state government consent, the Sultan inadvertently produced the most compelling practical argument for restructuring that the Southwest has had in years. The people making the case for regional autonomy could not have written a better script than the one the Sultan's statement provided.
Does the hijab rights issue in Southwest schools get resolved through the courts or through negotiation? The Sultan's citation of defied Supreme Court orders is the one part of his argument that commands the most legal and moral authority, and it remains unaddressed. Do Southwest governors formalize their positions on Sharia panels through state legislation, providing clear statutory boundaries? Or does the issue remain in an ambiguous regulatory vacuum that allows future incidents of the same kind? Does the Sharia controversy become part of the 2027 political conversation, used by candidates to mobilize Southwest identity or to argue for restructuring, or to challenge the Tinubu administration's handling of North-South religious tensions? Does the Sultan issue any further statement on the Southwest, particularly on the hijab issue, that tests the durability of the Southwest's unified response? Does the unprecedented alignment of Southwest forces translate into any durable political or institutional coordination? Or does the coalition fragment again once the external pressure subsides? Sharia panels have existed in the Southwest since 2002. The January 2025 crisis was not triggered by their existence, but by the public framing of a new inauguration in a way that made a private arbitration arrangement look like a formally established parallel judicial institution. The Southwest was not reacting to Sharia, it was reacting to the appearance of unilateral institutional establishment without state government or traditional ruler endorsement. The Sultan's subsequent defense of the panels as constitutional, while technically accurate for voluntary civil arbitration, conflated that legitimate constitutional argument with the specific procedural objection that had triggered the backlash. The Sultan's claim to authority over Yoruba Muslims rests on his position as NSCIA President General. The Southwest's response demolished this claim on two grounds. First, that no provision in Islamic law mandates Yoruba Muslims to accept the Sultan as their leader. And second, that the Sultan's documented silence on the killing of Yoruba Muslims, both Muslim and Christian, by Fulani herdsmen over the past decade disqualifies his claim to speak as their protector. That second argument, the argument of deeds, not titles, is the one that most Yoruba Muslim voices found the most compelling. It was the argument that closed the circle between the secessionists, the traditionalists, and the governors. They did not agree whether Nigeria should be restructured. They agreed that the Sultan had not earned the authority he was claiming.
We began with a question. Why did it take the Sultan of Sokoto to do what no Nigerian politician has managed in 25 years? Unite the Southwest. The answer is that the Southwest does not unite around agreements. It unites around rejections. It unites when it perceives that something is being done to it or demanded of it from outside. That has been true since 1993. It was true in 2003, when the region coalesced against what it perceived as Abuja's marginalization of the Yoruba after Obasanjo's presidency. It was true in 2020 with the NSAS protests, and it was true again in January and February 2025. The Sultan did not threaten the Southwest with violence or political coercion. He cited the Constitution, he cited Muslim rights, he cited Supreme Court judgments, and the Southwest said no anyway. Governors and secessionists, Muslims and Christians, traditionalists and modernists, APC and PDP. That level of unanimity is not about the Constitution. It is about identity. And identity-based political responses in Nigeria do not dissipate quickly. What this episode reveals about Nigeria is not that the North and South are heading toward religious conflict. That narrative is too simple and too dangerous. What it reveals is that Nigeria's federal structure has not resolved the fundamental question of who has legitimate authority to make demands across its geopolitical zones, and that this unresolved question will be tested repeatedly before, during, and after the 2027 elections. The Southwest's unified rejection of the Sultan's Sharia panel push is the most significant act of interfactional Yoruba political unity in a generation. It was not planned, it was not coordinated, it emerged spontaneously from every direction simultaneously. That is not a fluke, that is a fault line. You now know something that most Nigerians watching the news tonight do not know. What you do with that is up to you. Share it, debate it, challenge it. That is how democracies survive.
AFRONEWSHQ, Nigeria deserves better analysis. See you in the next one.